Have you ever wondered what a single moment can change everything? A millionaire CEO was rushing into a hospital until a crying little girl stopped him with 5 words that changed his life forever. The sun hung low in the sky that afternoon, casting long golden shadows across the hospital's glass exterior. James Winters, impeccably dressed in a light gray suit that seemed to reflect the soft shimmer of the city, stepped out of the backseat of his sleek black car. His leather shoes clicked confidently on the pavement as he adjusted the silver watch on his wrist, glancing at the time. He was a man who didn't like being late, not to business meetings, and certainly not to a contract signing that would secure his company's next multi-million-dollar expansion into the healthcare sector. For most of his life, hospitals had meant deals and development plans, not personal connection. That was about to change. As he approached the side entrance where the administrative offices were located, something caught the edge of his vision. A small figure was curled up beside the wall near a concrete planter filled with wilting flowers. It wasn't the sort of thing that usually registered in his mind, especially not when he was preoccupied. But this time, something made him stop. Maybe it was the stillness, or maybe it was the quiet sound of a child sobbing beneath the hum of the city. Could this be the turning point you've been waiting to hear about? James turned and walked slowly toward the figure. As he got closer, he saw it was a little girl, no older than 5, crouched into a tight ball with her head buried in her knees and her small hands pressed over her face. She was trembling. Her brown hair fell in messy waves over her shoulders, and her thin white t-shirt was damp with tears. Her jeans were worn, her sneakers scuffed, and her entire posture radiated something far beyond a child's usual sorrow. He crouched beside her without thinking, lowering himself until they were eye level. "Hey," he said gently, trying to keep his voice soft so he wouldn't scare her. "Are you okay?" The girl flinched slightly, then slowly moved her hands away from her face. Her cheeks were red, her eyelashes wet. She had the clearest blue eyes he had ever seen. Eyes filled with fear, but also something stronger. When she looked up at him, there was no shyness, only sadness. She blinked, trying to stop the tears from falling again, and shook her head. "My mommy's sick," she said quietly. Her voice was hoarse from crying, but she wasn't hysterical. It was the way she said it, calm, accepting, as if it wasn't the first time she'd had to explain it to someone. James's heart tightened. He had heard a lot of things in his career, urgent proposals, desperate investors, legal ultimatums, but nothing quite pierced like that small, steady voice. "Is she in the hospital?" he asked carefully, already suspecting the answer. The girl shook her head. "She's at home. She can't get up. We don't have money to come here. She needs medicine." James inhaled slowly. It felt surreal. Moments ago, he had been walking toward a polished conference room to negotiate high-level agreements. And now he was kneeling on the sidewalk next to a child who was calmly telling him her mother was too sick to move. He glanced around, almost expecting someone else, anyone to step in, to claim responsibility, to fix this. But there was no one, just the two of them, surrounded by busy people, too distracted to notice the world breaking for someone so small. He looked back at her. "What's your name?" "Lily," she answered. "Lily, my name is James," he said. "Would it be okay if I walked you home to see your mom? Maybe I can help." She hesitated, studying him with a seriousness beyond her years. After a pause, she nodded. "Okay." James stood up and held out his hand. She took it without fear. It was small and slightly cold, but she held tight, and for a moment, he felt an odd weight settle in his chest. Not burden, but responsibility. They walked quietly to his car. His driver, clearly confused, opened the door without a word as Lily climbed into the back seat, still clutching James's hand. As they drove away from the hospital, James canceled the meeting with a short text. The deal could wait. Whatever was happening next, he already sensed it was going to matter more than any signature ever could. The car ride was quiet, but not uncomfortable. Lily sat beside James in the back seat, her small frame tucked carefully into the leather interior, her legs swinging just above the floor. She kept her hands folded in her lap and her gaze fixed out the window, watching the city blur past them in streaks of gray and gold. James stole glances at her as they drove, trying to piece together what could have possibly led to such a young child being alone outside a hospital, calmly asking for help like she had rehearsed it 100 times. She didn't look scared anymore, just tired, like someone who had grown used to carrying weight that wasn't hers to hold. He had instructed the driver to follow Lily's directions, which were surprisingly precise. "Turn left at the blue mailbox," she had said, "and then later, there's the bakery with the green awning. We live behind that." It was a part of the city James had never really noticed. Rows of old duplexes, peeling paint on the siding, broken bicycles scattered in front yards, and laundry lines that sagged under the weight of everyday life. It was clear this was a neighborhood struggling to hold itself together, and James felt out of place in his tailored suit and polished shoes, a man built for boardrooms and glass elevators. When the car came to a stop, Lily opened the door herself and stepped out with quiet confidence. James followed her up a narrow concrete path lined with cracked flower pots and overgrown weeds. She didn't need to knock. She simply turned the handle and walked in, calling softly, "Mommy, I'm home." James hesitated at the threshold before stepping inside. The air smelled faintly of dust and something medicinal, and the small living room was dim despite the afternoon light trying to push through the curtains. There were toys in the corners, a stack of unopened mail on a side table, and a couch that sagged under the weight of someone lying motionless beneath a threadbare blanket. The woman stirred at the sound of Lily's voice. Her eyes fluttered open slowly, and her head turned slightly toward the door. She was young, no older than her mid-30s, but looked worn down by exhaustion and illness. Her cheeks were hollow, her skin pale, and her dark hair clung to her forehead in damp strands. When she saw James behind Lily, confusion flickered across her face. "Who?" she began. Her voice barely more than a whisper. Lily stepped beside her and gently touched her arm. "This is James. I met him at the hospital. He wants to help." The woman tried to sit up, but her body protested, and she sank back into the cushions with a wheeze. James crossed the room quickly and knelt beside the couch. "Please don't strain yourself," he said. "I'm not here to cause any trouble. Lily found me, and I just want to help if you'll let me." She looked at him with weary eyes, still trying to process the situation. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why would someone like you want to help someone like me?" James didn't have an easy answer. He glanced at Lily, who had sat down beside her mother and was holding her hand. "Because your daughter was sitting outside a hospital alone and crying. Because she told me you were sick, and because for the first time in a very long time, I couldn't walk away." The woman stared at him a moment longer, and something in her expression softened. She closed her eyes, exhaled slowly, and nodded. "My name is Sarah," she said. James stood and looked around the apartment, trying to assess how bad things were. The place wasn't filthy, but it clearly hadn't been cleaned properly in weeks. He noticed empty prescription bottles on the table and a box of cold crackers and canned soup on the counter, likely the only food left in the house. He turned back to her. "What exactly do you need? What are you sick with?" Sarah swallowed hard before answering. "I have lupus. It's been manageable for years, but lately it's gotten worse. I can barely get out of bed most days. I had to quit my job. I can't afford the new medications, and the free clinic is full for weeks. I didn't know what else to do." James took a breath. It was worse than he'd imagined. "You need treatment. Real care. I can get you into one of the best hospitals today. I'll pay for it. Everything." Sarah shook her head weakly. "I don't have anything to give you in return." "I'm not asking for anything," he said gently, "except maybe your trust." She looked at Lily, then back at him. There was a long silence, and then finally she gave a tired, almost broken nod. "Okay." That night, James arranged for a private nurse to come and evaluate Sarah's condition. Within hours, she was admitted to a specialized care facility, and Lily, after some resistance, was allowed to stay with a new nanny in James' home temporarily until Sarah could recover. James stayed close through all of it. He coordinated the hospital intake, arranged specialists, and called in favors he hadn't touched in years. He didn't fully understand why he was doing all this. He only knew that something had shifted in him the moment Lily looked up with those tearful eyes and asked for help. He had been on his way to close a business deal that day. But what he found instead was something far more important. A chance to matter, not as a CEO, not as a man with power, but as a human being who could change the course of someone's life with a single decision. And he wasn't going to waste it. James had never been the kind of man who let emotions cloud his judgment. In the boardroom, he was respected, even feared, for his precision and control. But the week that followed changed everything he thought he knew about what mattered. After Sarah's hospitalization, his life split cleanly into two parts. Before the sidewalk meeting with Lily, and after. It was as though some quiet, invisible fault line had broken open under his feet, and now every step forward was rooted in a different kind of purpose. Sarah was admitted to the care unit of a private hospital just outside the city. It wasn't the biggest facility, but it was the one James trusted. He knew the chief physician personally, had supported the hospital's foundation years ago, and now found himself leaning on those old connections, not for profit or prestige, but for the sake of a sick woman and her daughter who had no one else. Doctors began running tests immediately. The lupus had indeed progressed, more than she had admitted, more than Lily probably knew. Her body was in a fragile state, dangerously close to organ complications. Treatment couldn't wait, and under James's direct funding, it didn't have to. While Sarah was stabilized under the attentive care of specialists, James brought Lily home. His apartment was on the top floor of a modern glass tower overlooking the city. It had been designed for solitude and silence, dark wood floors, high ceilings, minimalist furniture. It was pristine, beautiful, and completely unprepared for a child. He realized that almost immediately when Lily walked in and looked around like she had entered a museum, not a home. Her shoes squeaked on the polished floor, and she stood still, hands folded in front of her, eyes wide. James knelt down next to her, unsure how to ease her discomfort. "It's okay to explore," he said, offering a small smile. "Nothing in here is more important than you." She didn't answer, but she nodded slightly and followed him inside. Over the next few days, James did something he'd never done before. He adjusted his world to fit someone else's needs. He brought in a nanny, Olivia, a kind woman in her 50s with a warm laugh and endless patience, who had once worked for one of his board members. He ordered a twin bed, soft pillows, blankets with stars on them, a shelf filled with books and dolls, and tiny sneakers that actually fit her. He let Lily pick the color for the rug in her room. She chose purple. But there were deeper adjustments, too, ones that had nothing to do with furniture or schedules. For the first time in his life, James woke up to an alarm set not for work, but for school drop-offs and breakfast. He learned how to make oatmeal without burning it, how to braid hair badly, and how to decipher the subtle meanings behind Lily's quiet moods. She never threw tantrums. She never made demands. But he began to notice when she stood too still, when her eyes darted toward the door more often than usual, when she hugged a stuffed animal a little too tightly. These were the signs of a child who had spent too long worrying about someone else's survival. He spoke to her gently every day and let her decide when to speak back. She began telling him little things, what her mom liked to cook before she got sick, how she used to sing at bedtime, the name of the stray cat that sometimes visited their old window. One night, as he tucked her in, she whispered, "Do you think Mommy's lonely without me?" The question shattered him. He sat by her bed and said, "No, sweetheart. She's resting now so she can come back stronger. And she knows you're safe." James kept his word. He visited Sarah nearly every day. Sometimes alone, sometimes with Lily, depending on the doctor's recommendation. When he sat by Sarah's bedside, he felt the weight of something he couldn't quite name. Guilt, maybe for the years he had spent blind to people like her, to struggles that didn't come with headlines or shareholder meetings. And yet, as he watched her heal slowly, painfully, he also felt something else, reverence. Sarah was resilient. She was raising a daughter with more grace and strength than he could understand, even as her body betrayed her. On the 5th day of her treatment, Sarah opened her eyes and smiled at him for the first time. It was a tired smile, but it wasn't guarded. "You've done more in a week than anyone has in years," she said. James sat back in the chair beside her and answered quietly, "She's a remarkable little girl." I couldn't walk away. Sarah studied him for a long moment, her eyes tracing the changes in his face. The way his expression softened when he talked about Lily, the way he sat closer now, less like a visitor and more like someone trying to belong. "She likes you," she said finally. "That doesn't happen easily." "I know," he replied. "I don't want to let her down." Sarah looked away, her voice barely above a breath. "She already lost her father once." "She doesn't know that, but I do." James froze, the words sinking into him like ice. He wanted to ask what she meant, but she had already closed her eyes again, her body giving in to rest. He stayed in that chair long after the machines had quieted and the nurses had left the room, wondering what story Sarah hadn't yet told him, and whether it was already too late to change it. The following days passed with a heavy sense of anticipation. James couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah's last words to him about Lily's father were more than a passing comment. They echoed in his mind during board meetings, while answering emails, and even when he was making Lily's breakfast in the early morning light. She had said it with intention, not accusation, and it lingered like an unfinished sentence. He found himself growing more cautious with every interaction, not wanting to press her too soon, but knowing there was something beneath the surface waiting to be uncovered. Sarah's health, while still fragile, began to stabilize. The treatment was working. The flare-up of her lupus had been severe, but caught in time. Doctors remained cautiously optimistic. Her strength returned slowly. Small victories like being able to sit up without help or feed herself again. James visited daily, often with Lily, who brought drawings or stories she made up during the car ride. The hospital room gradually became warmer, filled with laughter, stickers on the walls, and moments that almost resembled normalcy. One quiet afternoon, James arrived without Lily. She was napping at home with Olivia, and he wanted a moment alone to speak with Sarah. He brought her some tea from a place she once mentioned liking. She was propped up against the pillows when he entered, her face pale but alert. She smiled when she saw him, something genuine now, not forced or polite. "You look tired," she said as he pulled a chair closer to the bed. He chuckled softly and handed her the cup. "I'm learning that being a parent is a full-time job, even when you're not sure you're qualified for it." She sipped slowly, watching him over the rim of the cup. "You're doing well. Better than most who've had years to figure it out." There was a pause. Then James leaned forward, his voice careful but steady. "The other day you said something about Lily's father." Sarah placed the cup down gently, her fingers lingering on the handle. She didn't respond right away, as if weighing her next words. "I did," she finally said. "And I think it's time you knew the truth." James braced himself. He wasn't sure what he expected, a name, a painful story, a lost connection. But what came next unraveled his entire world. "James," she began, "you're her father." The room seemed to still, even the soft hum of the monitors fading into the background. He stared at her, not quite able to process what she had just said. "I didn't tell you back then because we weren't in each other's lives anymore. I didn't know how to reach you, and to be honest, I didn't believe you would care," she continued. "We were over. I found out I was pregnant a few weeks after everything ended. I thought about calling you, writing, something, but I was scared. And then life moved forward, and I convinced myself I had made the right choice." James sat back slowly, the weight of her words pressing against every part of him. Memories flooded his mind. Those few intense months they'd shared years ago. The way things had fallen apart, the silence that followed. He remembered walking away, thinking the relationship had simply run its course. He had no idea that something so lasting had come from it. "Why tell me now?" he asked quietly. "Because I see the way you look at her," Sarah said. "And she looks at you the same way. You deserve to know. And maybe it's selfish, but if something happens to me, I need to know she'll be with someone who truly loves her. Someone who won't disappear." James felt breathless. All those moments with Lily, the quiet talks, the laughter, the way she reached for his hand, suddenly took on a new light. The connection he felt hadn't been imagined. It was real, rooted in blood and history and something far greater than coincidence. He stood and walked to the window, staring out at the hospital courtyard below. Children played there sometimes. It seemed impossible that a few weeks ago he hadn't even known Lily existed. Now she was part of him in a way that made his heart ache. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "You don't have to say anything," Sarah replied. "Just be there. That's what matters." He turned to her, eyes filled with emotion. "I will. I promise you, I'm not going anywhere." Sarah nodded, and something in her expression eased. For the first time, there was no tension in her shoulders, no guarded look in her eyes. There was trust, deep and fragile, but real. As James left the room that day, everything felt different. He wasn't just helping a woman and her child anymore. He was stepping into something far more sacred. He had a daughter. And now that he knew, nothing in the world could pull him away from her again. James woke early the next morning, long before the sun began to rise, and sat on the edge of his bed with the revelation from the previous day still echoing in his chest. He hadn't slept much. His mind had cycled through every moment he'd shared with Lily since the day they met, replaying her smiles, her quiet trust, the way she looked at him with those unmistakable blue eyes, his eyes. Now that he knew the truth, everything about her made sense in a way it hadn't before, and the weight of it was both overwhelming and grounding. He had a daughter, not just in a metaphorical sense, not a symbolic bond that had formed over time. Lily was his child, and the past 6 years of her life had passed without him. It stung more than he expected. He had missed her first steps, her first words, the way she clung to her mother's hand on the first day of preschool. But worse than missing those moments was knowing that Sarah had endured all of it alone, carrying not only the burden of illness, but the full responsibility of raising a daughter without support. He wanted to be angry at her for not telling him, but he couldn't summon it. He could only imagine the fear and uncertainty she must have felt, especially back then when he was a different man, more closed off, more selfish. Maybe she had been right to protect Lily from that version of him. But things were different now. He was different now. Later that morning, as Lily sat across from him at the kitchen island, spooning cereal into her mouth while still half asleep, he studied her with a new kind of wonder. She looked so small in the oversized chair, her messy hair sticking up in every direction, wearing one of the cartoon pajamas Olivia had picked out. She caught him staring and tilted her head. "Why are you looking at me like that?" she asked, her voice light and curious. James smiled. "Because I'm lucky," he said simply. She grinned back, not quite understanding, but liking the answer. "I'm lucky, too. Olivia says you make the best pancakes." James laughed and promised to prove it that weekend. But inside, his heart ached to say the words that now sat on the edge of his tongue. "I'm your father. I love you. I will never leave." But it wasn't time yet. Sarah had asked for space, had asked him not to rush the truth, to let Lily continue building their bond naturally until she was ready to hear it in full, and James respected that. He would wait, no matter how much he longed to say it. He spent the next few days juggling business obligations and parenting with an intensity that surprised even himself. Somehow contracts and profit margins felt dimmer now, less urgent than teaching Lily how to tie her shoes or helping her draw dinosaurs on the living room floor. He still handled work. He had to, but his priorities had quietly shifted. His team noticed. His assistant mentioned he seemed more present, more calm, and for once he didn't brush off the compliment with a joke. He simply said, "I have something worth coming home to now." Sarah's condition improved steadily. With proper care and rest, her body responded better than the doctors had hoped. She was still weak, but she no longer looked like someone fading. Her eyes regained their alertness, her voice its steadiness. During one visit, she asked to speak with James alone while Lily played with the hospital's therapy dog in the garden. "I've been thinking a lot about what happens next," Sarah said, her fingers nervously picking at the blanket. "I can't undo the years you missed, but I want you to have the chance to catch up." James leaned forward. "I want to be in her life. Not just now, always." Sarah nodded. "Then I think we should start preparing to tell her slowly. You've already become her favorite person, and I don't think it will shock her. She's very intuitive." He smiled gently, relief washing over him. "I've wanted to say it since the moment I found out." They agreed to wait a few more weeks until Sarah could come home, until Lily could hear it in the comfort of their shared space, not the sterile walls of a hospital. And so, James doubled down on showing up for Lily in every way possible. He picked her up from school. He sat through dance classes. He let her paint on his shirt when she insisted he be her art project. And at night, when she finally drifted off beside him on the couch after a movie, he would sit for hours just watching her, marveling that something so precious had come into his life in such an unexpected way. And every night he whispered the same promise under his breath, knowing she couldn't hear it yet, but believing that one day soon she would. "I'm here now. And I'm never leaving again." The first morning Sarah returned home was quiet in a way that felt delicate, like a moment balanced on the edge of something sacred. Olivia had made tea and set out breakfast, but it mostly went untouched. James had taken the day off completely, silenced his phone, and cleared his calendar. He stood in the hallway outside Lily's room as Sarah knelt beside her daughter, brushing her fingers gently through her hair, her voice soft and soothing. Lily had barely let go of her since she'd arrived. She clung to Sarah with the unspoken fear of losing her again, and Sarah responded with endless patience and calm, never once pushing her away. James watched from the doorway, giving them space, but Sarah waved him in with a small smile. He stepped forward, sitting beside them on the floor. Lily looked up at him, her face full of contentment now that both of them were there. "Can we stay like this forever?" she asked sleepily. James chuckled, looking at Sarah. "We'll do our best," he said, and he meant every word. Later that day, after Lily had fallen asleep on the couch with a book pressed to her chest, Sarah sat with James on the back patio. The evening was still and warm, the golden light catching the edges of her hair. She looked stronger than she had in weeks, though still thin, her movements careful. She sipped her tea slowly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I've been thinking about how we'll tell her," she said quietly. "She's already started asking questions about how we met, why we're spending so much time together now." James nodded, his hands folded between his knees. "I think she already knows somewhere inside. She just doesn't have the words for it yet." Sarah turned to look at him. "She's going to be okay, isn't she?" "Yes," James said without hesitation. "Because she has you, and now she has me." That night, the three of them sat together on the living room floor, surrounded by markers and construction paper. Lily was in the middle of creating an elaborate get-well card, even though Sarah was sitting right beside her. She insisted it was for when her mom was extra better. James was helping cut out shapes, though his skills with scissors were questionable at best. Sarah laughed at his crooked stars, and Lily said they were perfect anyway. The moment felt so ordinary, so domestic, and yet to James it was extraordinary. This wasn't just something he was witnessing. He was part of it. The sharp lines of his former life, contracts, meetings, flights, had started to blur, softened by the steady presence of something real. For the first time, his home felt like a place where a life was being built. As the week went on, Sarah and James moved gently around each other, navigating the newness of being in the same space again. Sometimes it felt natural, like slipping into a rhythm they'd never had time to find years ago. Other times, there was hesitation, pauses where old wounds hadn't fully closed. But they talked honestly about the past, about the time lost, about what forgiveness looked like in the context of a second chance. James asked her if she regretted not telling him sooner, and she admitted that she had many times. But she also said that the version of him she sees now, the man cooking breakfast, sitting through Lily's school assemblies, reading bedtime stories twice just because she asked, was the man she had always hoped he could be. And that was enough. One evening, as Lily curled into Sarah's lap during a movie, James sat across from them, his chest full of everything he hadn't had words for. When the credits rolled and Lily had drifted off, Sarah motioned for him to sit beside her. He did. She looked down at her daughter, then up at him, and simply said, "Tomorrow." He understood. It was time. The next day would bring change. The truth once spoken aloud couldn't be taken back. But it would also bring clarity and love, and a family not born of plans or perfection, but of choice, of showing up again and again for the people who needed you most. The morning began like most others had since Sarah returned home, quiet, gentle, with the soft sounds of breakfast being made and sunlight leaking through the curtains. James had risen early, though he hadn't slept much the night before. The weight of what was to come pressed against him, but it wasn't a feeling of dread. It was anticipation. Something long overdue was finally going to be made right. He looked at the small stack of drawings Lily had made over the last few weeks. Pictures of the three of them holding hands, of hearts, of her and Sarah in stick figure form under a smiling sun. His favorite was one she'd drawn of him in a superhero cape with the word James misspelled beneath it. He kept that one in his briefcase now, even though he rarely carried it anymore. He had stopped needing to escape into work. This was where he belonged. Sarah was already awake, sitting at the edge of Lily's bed, softly brushing her daughter's hair back from her forehead. Lily stirred as James entered, stretching and yawning, her small arms reaching out to both of them like she'd done this every morning of her life. James sat on the bed beside her and smiled. "Sleep okay, Peanut?" he asked. She nodded and nestled against Sarah. After breakfast, they all went to the park, walking along the shaded paths and feeding ducks by the pond. Sarah and James shared glances, quiet exchanges of reassurance and timing. Lily was in a particularly bright mood, skipping ahead and humming to herself, the world simple and full of wonder from her point of view. When they returned home, James suggested they sit in the living room and talk for a bit before lunch. Lily flopped onto the couch, kicking off her shoes and wrapping herself in a blanket. James sat beside her. Sarah sat across, her eyes steady, her voice calm. "Sweetheart," Sarah began, "can we tell you a little story today about us? About something special?" Lily blinked, curious, but not alarmed. "Okay," she said, hugging her knees to her chest. James took a slow breath, searching for the right words. "Do you remember when we met outside the hospital?" Lily nodded. "You found me when I was crying." "I did," he said gently. "And I've been with you ever since because I care about you so much. But there's something even more important I want you to know. Something we didn't tell you before because we were waiting for the right moment." Lily tilted her head, watching him closely now. "You know how you've always just called me James," he said, his voice soft. "Well, there's another name you can call me, too. One that's even more special." She frowned, confused. "What name?" James's throat tightened. He glanced at Sarah, who nodded, then turned back to Lily. "You can call me Dad, because I'm your dad, Lily. I always have been. I just didn't know until recently." For a moment, the room was still. Lily didn't move. Her face was unreadable. Her small brows furrowed in concentration as if she was replaying every moment they'd shared. Every time he had kissed her forehead, helped with her homework, tied her shoes. She looked at Sarah, who gave a slow, loving smile. "It's true, baby," she said. "He's your real dad." Then Lily's eyes filled with tears, not of pain, but something softer. She stood up slowly and walked over to James, her lower lip trembling. "You're really my daddy?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James opened his arms, his own eyes stinging. "Yes, I'm your daddy." She didn't say anything more. She just threw herself into his arms, pressing her face into his chest, and he held her as tightly as he could without making her feel crushed. Her small body shook against him, and he realized she'd been waiting for this in her own way. Somehow, she had known. Somehow, she had always hoped. After a long moment, she pulled back, wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand, and said, "Then I want to be called Lily Winters." James laughed through his tears. "Deal," he said. "You already are." That evening, as they sat around the dinner table, everything felt new and yet perfectly familiar. Lily kept looking at James like she was memorizing every detail of his face again, as if seeing him for the first time. She called him Dad twice, quietly, experimentally, and each time he smiled so wide it nearly broke him. Sarah looked at them both with eyes full of quiet victory. She had carried the secret for so long, afraid of what would happen if it ever came to light. But now, watching her daughter beam with something that looked a lot like peace, she knew it had been worth waiting for the right moment. As the sky turned to dusk and the first stars appeared, Lily climbed into James' lap and curled against him, sleepy from the day, but not wanting to let go. "I'm glad you found me," she whispered. James kissed the top of her head, his voice barely audible. Me, too, baby, more than anything in the world. The weeks that followed felt like the slow unfolding of a second chance that no one had dared to believe was possible. With the truth finally spoken, everything between James, Sarah, and Lily seemed to shift into a new, brighter rhythm. There was no need for careful glances anymore. No pauses between affection. The barrier had fallen. Lily now said, "Dad," without hesitation, without testing at first, like it had always belonged on her tongue. And James, who had spent most of his adult life believing he would never have a family of his own, now found his life shaped by tiny hands tugging at his sleeve, by giggles echoing through hallways, and by the quiet comfort of Sarah sitting beside him at the end of every day. Sarah was healing faster now. Being home, surrounded by love, gave her energy no medicine had been able to provide on its own. She cooked again, slowly at first, leaning on James for support, laughing as he clumsily chopped vegetables or burned toast. She took short walks with Lily, started drawing again, something she hadn't done in years, and filled her sketchbook with scenes of their new life, a park bench with 2 pairs of shoes underneath, a child's smile, James's hand holding Lily's. The drawings were soft and imperfect, but full of meaning. James had renovated one of the guest rooms into a space for Lily, a real room with walls painted the color of sunrise, shelves for her growing collection of books, and a ceiling light shaped like a cloud. She decorated it herself, pinning up paper stars and messy finger paintings. It wasn't polished or coordinated like the rest of the house, but it was alive, and now so was the home. Every Friday night became tradition. Pizza on the living room floor, a movie, and the 3 of them piled onto the same couch with Lily squeezed between them like the center of their universe. Saturdays were for pancakes and lazy mornings, sometimes museum trips or park picnics, and Sundays were for walks and quiet talks where James and Sarah discussed the future in soft tones, while Lily skipped ahead, chasing butterflies or pretending the sidewalk was a secret path. They were simple things, ordinary things. But to James, they were everything. One evening, as Lily lay sleeping, curled in a blanket on the sofa, Sarah and James sat on the balcony with warm mugs in their hands and the city lights glittering below. Sarah leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder, her fingers laced through his. For a long time, they didn't speak. They didn't need to, but eventually she turned to him, her voice barely louder than the wind. "You know, I used to dream of this life. Not exactly like this, of course. I never imagined we'd come together in such a strange way, but the feeling of it, the peace, the safety, the love, and for a long time, I thought it was impossible that people like me don't get stories like this." James kissed the top of her head gently. "Maybe we don't get perfect stories," he said. "But we get real ones, and that feels even better." She smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. Not from sadness, but from fullness. "I don't want to waste any more time." "Neither do I," he replied. And he meant it. The man who once built his identity around control, solitude, and success now measured his days by bedtime hugs and breakfast requests. By the way Sarah smiled at him across the dinner table, by how Lily squeezed his hand when she was tired or nervous or just wanted to be close. He had gained something that couldn't be bought or won, something that had taken root in the cracks of his old life and grown wild, beautiful, and real. A few months later, on a quiet spring afternoon in the garden, James knelt down beside Lily and asked her if she'd like to be a part of something special. Confused, she looked at him with those bright blue eyes. "You already said I'm your daughter," she said. He smiled. "You are forever. But I was wondering if you'd like to help me ask Mommy something important." When Sarah came outside, Lily ran to her, holding a small ring box in her hands and grinning from ear to ear. Sarah froze as James stood behind her, his heart racing, but his voice steady. "You gave me the best gift in the world without ever asking for anything in return," he said. "And I don't want a single day of my life without you in it. Will you marry me?" Sarah's hands flew to her mouth, tears already brimming in her eyes. Lily jumped up and down, chanting, "Say yes. Say yes." She didn't hesitate. She said yes. And so their story, once fractured by fear, silence, and distance, closed its darkest chapter and turned a page into something radiant. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't without scars, but it was whole. James had found more than just love or redemption. He had found his family. And in that quiet, imperfect miracle, he finally understood what it meant to truly come home. This story ends not with dramatic twists, but with something far more powerful: healing. What began with a chance encounter outside a hospital becomes a quiet revolution in one man's soul. James, a figure once defined by wealth and control, is softened not by tragedy, but by love he didn't expect. The discovery that Lily is his daughter doesn't just reshape his priorities. It reshapes his identity. He doesn't try to erase the past. He owns it. And that's what makes the ending feel earned, not forced. Sarah's journey, too, is a rare portrait of quiet resilience. She never seeks pity. She seeks safety for her child, for herself, and finally she finds it. But even more importantly, she finds someone willing to meet her where she is, not where she had to survive alone. The real triumph here isn't the marriage proposal or even the happy family they form. It's the fact that three broken paths found one another again and chose to stay. In a world obsessed with instant redemption, this story dares to show us that sometimes love comes after the apology. Sometimes family is built from the pieces we thought were lost. It's not just a happy ending. It's a meaningful one. Brought to you by Millionaire in Love.